You're here today with Will Jackson. Will, thanks for coming in.
No problem at all. It's a 2-hour delay, so I'm happy. I'm not cranky like I usually am.
So you've got the big weekend coming up, Penn Fellows weekend.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we're going to Princeton Day School in Jersey. I generally am a fan of Central Jersey, but I am not a fan of giving presentations in front of people.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm not – I say this not to minimize how awesome the Penn stuff can be, but I'm not looking forward to it, if I'm being frank.
This is the
big one.
The big presentation on your inquiry project
Yeah,
you've been working on all year, right?
Yeah, working on it all year with the guys. So my project is about how do I teach for critical consciousness in middle school using literature. And it's been a blast, getting my guys to be critical about the world in different ways. I think I'm lucky because the guys here are smart, and all I have to do is just tell them, hey, here's what I want you guys to kind of aim for, and then they always kill it. So
what does that mean, critical consciousness?
So it's basically, it derives from a Brazilian philosopher named Paulo Freire, and he was basically, I'll try to kind of do bullet points, but he was hanging around these Brazilian workers and wondering why they weren't trying to improve their condition. And essentially what he says is they need to achieve critical consciousness to be integrated with the spirit of the time. In other words, being willing to look at an oppressive system and then work to dismantle it in pursuit of justice. So he says this is mostly because of democratic inexperience, where Brazilian slaves weren't asked to vote, right? They didn't practice collectivizing and organizing. So that lack of experience from slavery has basically stayed there until modern day, and there's no basically practice or norms for them to improve their condition. And I think there's some parallels to American slavery too. No one was asking the slaves what they thought about the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So you basically create a system where people don't worry to question the systems around them. So what I'm trying to do is get my kids to think about okay, what oppressive structures do we see in the world? And this could range from discrimination, racial discrimination, to we do these traditions that we don't reconsider, like singing Happy Birthday. It's pretty weird. So I think my goal is just to get my guys to think critically, and then hopefully one day they work to transform the world around them. I'm still waiting to see if that happens.
Interesting. So what are you talking about in class, or how are you sort of monitoring how this is going in your language arts class? Or that's what you're teaching, language arts? Yeah,
language arts. So it's mostly through short stories and Animal Farm. Not so much with our third book, Chasing Lincoln's Killer, but with short stories, basically. One of the short stories is called The Sniper. I think it's pretty popular. I think a lot of people read it, but for those who haven't, it's basically about this. It's about the Irish Civil War, and you're following this young soldier, and he's cursing about the war. He doesn't like it, but then he gets shot at. He gets amped up to kill this person who snipes at him. Long story short, he snipes the guy. He wants to go see the body, see who it is, and it turns out it's his brother. And so that allows for my students to see the horrors of war, and we have them write a paper about it. And then at the end, I basically ask them, well, what do we do about this then? I always would ask them, okay, you recognize that this is not good. Now, what do you think we should do about it? And that's the critical consciousness piece. It's okay, war is bad, but should we, is it necessary? Is it something that we should always avoid? Is it unavoidable? So getting them to kind of recognize how bad it is in the story, and then reach out to the world, and then input okay, how would I solve this if I could wave a magic wand, essentially. Mm-hmm. And the same with Animal Farm. Napoleon has created a system where the animals can't read, and he's using squealer to push out propaganda. So they all recognize that propaganda is bad and that reading is essential to protect yourself against it. Mm-hmm. But how do we solve this in real life? So it's really just asking that final question of okay, what do we do about this now? So it's been really fun. And I think the trick for me is always being explicit that we're reading about animals on a farm, but it's not actually animals on a farm. This is an analysis of the world around us. It's not just about Napoleon being a jerk. It's okay, how do people in power maintain their leverage and power over the others, and how they manipulate them?
Do you read Lord of the Flies too?
We don't. That's 8th grade. It's
okay.
8th grade.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Also,
yeah.
The Lottery, Shirley Jackson.
We read the Lottery. Yeah, so we read the Lottery, and I'll share something from my presentation that I'll do on May 9th. But this kid, I guess I shouldn't use student names. Can I use student names?
I don't know. Maybe not. You could. You can.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
Well, I had a student who, in the Lottery, it forces students to reconsider the traditions we have. So this one student was yeah, so in this lottery, they do this thing for the harvest, and it shows how this tradition isn't really good. It's kind of like Halloween. So you go around to these strangers' houses and you get candy from them. That's kind of weird. And then he goes and also Groundhog Day. He's it's not scientifically likely the groundhog actually affects the weather. And it's yeah, a lot of these traditions we have are really ridiculous.
Yep.
And they have been every year at the exact same time. Again,
I always use Thanksgiving, where you kill a turkey and put it on your table and sit around with your family and eat the turkey.
And then watch football.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so I think if you just sit, if you were an alien looking at American, and not just American society, but any society, you'd be like, wow, a lot of stuff you guys, again, singing Happy Birthday. We're in a circle singing to one person about how they're getting older. Mm-hmm. That's weird. Like, it's just objectively creepy. So yeah, the lottery's a good one too. We read The Lottery, The Low Cut, Strike Again by Jason Reynolds, The Sniper, and The Necklace is also a really good one.
I've read The Necklace before.
Yeah.
I forget what that's about.
So it's about this woman who basically gets this necklace that she thinks costs a lot of money, and she loses it. She works her entire life to make up for it, like repay it, and ends up the necklace was fake anyway.
Right.
So it's kind of this idea of like what's valuable in life, and also like the idea of being so attached to material things. I think it's important.
So these are all pretty grim stories, and I always say that to my English class. I'm like, all the stories we read in American literature are pretty dark, which I control the curriculum, and I wish sometimes I could bring in some more positive and uplifting stories, which I try to do. But is there maybe some thoughts from the students about like how traditions are positive or good for society and for people? Do they talk about that at all?
They haven't in their papers, probably because of the nature, just the way I asked the questions.
It's hard to say that when you read The Lottery.
Yeah, exactly. But I think if I can put my middle school hat on, I think they would value like the traditions they look forward to. Like, for example, like they want to go to prom one day, like they want to have a senior day, and you know, when they get to high school. So I think like the ones that they look forward to, they would say are good. And
they love the Raiders, right?
Yeah,
and that's a tradition that I personally don't love that much because really? I'm trying to teach class, and you know, 25 seniors in high schools are running through the room like crazy, man. But I understand why that's an important tradition at Gilman.
Yeah, totally. So I think even like the Turkey Tango. That one. The first time I was here, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I thought it was crazy. But again, I think it's just embedded in the culture. And so I think for them, it's easy for them to justify the ones that they like. And it's not so easy to justify the ones that they don't appreciate.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it just depends on what perspective they're taking at the time.
Yeah, it's an interesting project because I feel like in English classes, what you're doing, this is sort of what you're doing anyway, is you're just critiquing and thinking critically about the things that you read and what would I do in this situation. And you sort of, you know, you don't have to change too much about what you were doing before, I assume.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's actually one of my key observations. So like, I think it basically is what I think all English classes do. You're taking the lessons from the literature and applying it to real life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what any good English class does. For me, what I found is that I went into this project thinking I'm going to have to do all these like super radical discussions and like rethink how I do my class, and that, like right when basically year started, I was like, oh wait, like the paper is where my bread's going to be buttered here. Mm-hmm. So like I think the paper is where like I found most of my key data points, and I think it allows for kids to like write something down, sit with it, and then like reevaluate later, and that's important. It's not like I say this one thing in class that kind of just flutters away.
Right.
You write it on a piece of paper, you have to sit and read it, evaluate it, and then rewrite it or whatever. So
what kind of things are the kids writing about, and what are you collecting? Like, what kind of data are you collecting from their papers?
Yeah, so from the papers is mostly like it's just the paper itself, like just kind of how they're like analyzing the world around them and using literature to kind of speak to how it's affecting how they view the world. Mm-hmm. I've done like exit tickets have been important. I've had 2 particular lessons about like evaluating propaganda and empathy for the working class. Where I've collected exit tickets that have been really good. So yeah, just kind of typical like survey responses like about English class, how the class is going. So papers, exit ticket survey responses, and that's mostly what I've gotten.
So how long is the presentation that you have to give this weekend? I remember, so when I had to do that, we were on Zoom, and I was in my parents' basement in Philly. We didn't really know what was going on. It was April of 2020.
Yeah,
and
a month in, that's not. Yeah.
You know, my dad was coming around and cleaning all the grogroceries off with because we didn't know what COVID was, you know. Totally. And I just remember being in the basement and having to present on Zoom.
Yeah, that's rough.
And it was before, I guess, Zoom became really big.
Yeah.
It was like the first usage of Zoom was my pen.
Right.
inquiry presentation. So I think it's like a 30-minute presentation.
So I think my guess is that it's probably cut down since you've been in the program. So it's only 10. I think it's supposed to be 10 minutes.
Okay.
My goal is like 9 minutes and 41 seconds. Like that. Like I'm going to keep it. I'm right after lunch on Saturday. I'm not trying to hold anybody up. We're going to keep it rolling, baby.
Gotcha.
9 minutes and 41 seconds is my goal.
Gotcha. Well, it seems like you're ready to go. I mean,
yeah, I think.
I don't know why you'd be nervous. It's a great project.
Yeah, so I think it's funny. Like I'm nervous in the sense that like I think my overall portfolio is still being evaluated and like I'm still tweaking things in that.
Yeah.
But if someone asked me like, hey, do you think you crushed it this year in your class? I'd be like, absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. Like I don't think, like if I was holding myself up against other teachers teaching the exact same content as me, I think I did a really good job. Mm-hmm. So that I'm proud of. I think people understand that I care about my students, I care about my class, and I think I'm comfortable teaching the stuff I teach. So I think in that sense, I'm like, I know like I did my best teaching the boys. That being said, my portfolio still has some work to do. So I got to keep working.
How have you found the Penn program these past 2 years? What are some of the highlights of it? And I know you've been to, so you're going to Princeton Day, and you've been to maybe GA.
Yeah, I've been to GA, Trinity in New York, and we went to Hopkins in New Haven.
Okay.
I think that's it. Also, overall, I'll focus on the positives.
Yeah.
I think probably the best part is like having the cohort and like hearing everyone else's stories about how the schools are. You have like automatic network of other young teachers, and that's really cool to be involved in that. I think for me, I've unequivocally become a better teacher. Like when I was teaching at Severin, I remember thinking about this, like, okay, like when I'm 30, I'm going to look back and be happy I got my master's. And I still think that's the case. Like I think I'm going to be happy that I did it. And I think the framework Penn has allowed me to like read into has made me a better teacher and more thoughtful and refined about what I want to do as a teacher. Like even going in inquiry, like I was thinking about like when I was thinking about my question, I was like, how do I get my students to like care about reading and then also apply it to real life and be critical about? Like I was thinking about all these things, and then when I started reading into it, I was like, oh, like it gave me the language to then like articulate what I want my students to do. Yeah. So I think those are definitely the two most positive things. And also like just having like Sam Denius and Will Lamb and Keenan and Beth Knapp, Davina, Matt, and like Brian Ledyard, just being around those people are always awesome on those weekends. So. Yeah, I really found the cohort at Gilman really supportive. Yeah. I mean, Brian was my mentor when I started out, and it's great watching him teach. And I would watch him, and then I'd go to my next class and try to just do the same thing as what he was doing. And it's a great stepping stone into becoming full-time professional teacher, I thought. And I learned so much from, not only the Penn faculty, but really the other people and the mentors in the program. And, people in your same position who you're talking about, oh, this is not working in my class, so can you send me that lesson plan? Right? Totally. Like, and I have to mention, like, Nick Platt and Matt Tully. Like, so my first year out there was just Nick Platt's my mentor, just following his lead. Like, he was scheduling, like, he basically was planning my class out the entire year. And I was like, all right, I'll just check the boxes that he's doing. And then I started to find my voice toward the end of the year, and I started doing my own thing. And then this year I've really been pretty autonomous. So Nick's been a huge help, and he's extremely thoughtful and smart, and I'm super happy to have him as a mentor. Matt Tully also, like, department chair at a middle school language arts office. Like he's like a magician wouldn't be the word, but also a drill sergeant wouldn't be the word either. Like he knows. He's just a super professional teacher and is really good at his job. So just having him to lean on, like I'll say, hey Matt, like what do you think of this like writing question? Or hey Matt, like I made a new grammar exercise. Can you read over it, make sure I didn't mess it up? So he's great, and I'm just surrounded by awesome people. Reed Rando, also like a person, like he's helped me stay sane in moments when I should be insane, and I can just rant to him. We'll like close the LA office door, and we'll start talking about whatever. I have an awesome support system here, and it's been a blast. I remember stepping on the campus here 2 Decembers ago, and feeling like I need to be here, and I haven't regretted it since. Like it's awesome. That's great. Yeah. What was the biggest challenge for you in the middle school classroom coming in, like first year teaching? Do you teach 8th or 7th? 7th grade. Yeah. What was difficult about first year teaching and being in the middle school classroom? I know you had taught at Severn before, but I don't know. The weirdest part was like the first, and I think it's partly the all-boy environment, and I'm still trying to figure it out, but like none of the boys talked to me like the first 6 months. Like I would walk the hallways. Like when I was at Severn, I walked the hallways and all the kids were like, hey, Mr. Jackson, blah, blah, blah. Like the first 6 months at Gilman, like no one talked to me. Like the student wise, and I was like, is this something? Am I doing something wrong? Like what happened? So I kind of like went through this I don't know, weird phase of like not feeling accepted, or just like not understanding how to connect with some of the boys, but eventually that wore off. So that was probably my biggest challenge. But I think the 40-minute class period is by far the hardest thing.
Okay.
Like, I think this has been, if I had to bring up the Penn program, a struggle for me is that, like, I think people, I'll say at Penn, don't understand how difficult it is. Some of them have taught. I don't want to diminish that. But teaching and doing this inquiry project with a 40-minute class period is extremely difficult. And I think there are some limitations to that. So that was probably my biggest adjustment. It's just understanding, like, okay, I got 40 minutes. What do I want to hit? And, like, you got to just, like, be very punctual. I always have a timer in class. Like, I'm like, all right, guys, 7 minutes and we're moving.
Right.
10 minutes and we're moving. And so I have to be really intentional about
You almost
time.
have just what you've got to get to one thing in 40 minutes. That's it.
So it's funny. Actually, most days I get to 3 things.
3 things.
So there's 4 strands in middle school language arts: writing, grammar, literature, vocab. And I basically can hit 3 to 4 in each period. So basically what it looks like is kids walk in, and there's always something to do. So, like, they'll walk in, they'll have, like, a grammar workbook to work in. And that's 12 minutes max. That's doing it and review, and they work in partners. Then we'll move to, like, I don't know, something about a short story or Animal Farm, whatever. And then we'll do, like, a vocab exercise, or we'll do, like, I'll just give them time to work on a paper. But if you structure it, you can't get to 3 things. But you just have to recognize, like, you're not going to have a 40-minute discussion. They're 7th grade boys. They don't want to talk for 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. Like, you save, I think the trick is, and I've learned this from Davina Bala, is, like, it's okay to have things unsaid at the end of class. So, like, I save my discussions, usually for the end of class, like 8 minutes or 10 minutes. And at the end, boys are like, wait, I have one more thing. It's like, all right, just save it. Save it for next time. And so I think it's just how you structure it. But, yeah, I do get to 3 or 4 things most times.
Yeah, the middle school boys is tough. I can't imagine being in the all boys.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. What's sort of what's the hardest part about, all 7th grade boys in one room? Is it settling them down? Is it getting started? Because I feel like once they get talking, they could get into things, but maybe it's just setting the room up a little bit.
Yeah, so, and this is part of my inquiry too, is like my trick is, I learned from Matt Tolley, like, keep them busy. Like, have something for them to do. Like, I talk out of the 40 minutes, like, to the class, maybe a max of 5 minutes. Like, they're always
They've got to be moving.
Yeah, they're moving, they're working. So that's my first trick. My second trick is I try to minimize the number of things they can forget to bring into the classroom. So I always have pencils. I always, like, their grammar books stay in the classroom. So they never have to worry, like, I have to go to my locker and get my whatever. The vocab books never come in the classroom. So the only thing they really need to bring is, like, their binder, some paper, and, like, last night's homework. And even if they forget, like, their Animal Farm, I scan the chapters most of the time. Or if they, for some reason, lost their grammar book because they went and grabbed it, I scan it. Like, there's no excuse to not have the materials. So that's my trick. I think a lot of the boys will, like, take advantage of, like, forgetting something to just walk the halls. Like, they can, if they go to the bathroom, they lost 8 minutes of class. So my rule is, like, no bathroom breaks. Like, no, hold it.
Yeah.
Unless it's an absolute emergency.
I like that.
Yeah, it's just, so I just, like, can I go to charge my iPad? No. Like, you're working. So yeah, I think it's just, like, holding the line and setting the structure up for them. But more than anything, I think what I've realized is, like, because I focus on, like, having fun, it gives them that buy-in to want to be in class anyway. So, like, I think my guys, if I had to ask them, they'd say, like, I don't really want to leave class anyway. I want to be in the room. Mm-hmm. So that's the trick. You have to make them want to be in the room. That's the job of the educator.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how much do you go into, I guess, the history of what's going on with the Russian Revolution and Stalin and, what's happening in the Soviet Union while Orwell is writing this book? Yeah,
so last year I went into it, not deep, but I gave them, I think, a decent background history of it. But this year I kind of approached it differently. Again, to reference Davina Bala, I did this question storm technique where basically instead of, like, doing this, like, soliloquy of, like, the Russian Revolution, I basically gave them, like, little passages of Animal Farm and said, I want you to ask as many questions as you can about this passage. So, like, some of the words were like comrades, blah blah blah. So, like, are these communists? Like, what's going on? Blah blah blah. And so it avoided me, like, again, lecturing them about it, and they got to just, like, kind of explore it that way. I think it was more useful. We did do after chapter 1 this like Karl Marx versus Old Major, like, quote comparison. So, like, looking at thoughts Karl Marx had about capitalism and, like, comparing it to Old Major, and they really appreciated that, I think, seeing how, like, Old Major is supposed to be this guy who's, like, reevaluating how we distribute resources, essentially, in the world. So I don't get into too much of the revolution because I think it just, like, it'll go in one ear and mostly out the other. So I just try to keep them working, keep them busy instead of me lecturing to them.
When I was teaching Lord of the Flies this year to a senior elective, and one of the things that I wanted to honestly do is when I walk to school, I walk past the lower school playing on the field, and they're playing baseball or something, or playing kickball. And I feel like it'd be an interesting exercise just to observe, like when you're reading these books about human nature and the way people act in groups and leadership, and how some kids take control and start screaming at the other kids, and the power dynamics of all that. Just observe the lower school kids playing on the playground, right? They're doing the same things that we're reading about in these books.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in middle school recess, like if I have recess duty next month, like it's really interesting to see how boys, like there's again a group of boys who. So actually, I'll speak to a moment. There was a kid in the cafeteria the other day, and I think as adults sometimes we forget what kids care about. And this kid like walks over. It was during advisory seating, so he wasn't supposed to be walking towards my table, but he was talking to one of his friends. He goes, "Hey, like it's me, you, and this kid against him, or these three kids during recess. Like that's what they care about. They're like, we were playing soccer at recess, and I need to make sure I have my team ready the second we step outside. Like they're not thinking about. I wish they were, but they're not thinking about the poem we just read in language arts.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, we have basketball in 14 minutes. Who's gonna be in my team?
Yep.
I gotta make sure I get a ball. So yeah, I think that's what they care about. And then there's other kids who like just walk around and they just talk, and like they're super relaxed. And there's other kids who just like lay down. So it's really weird. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how boys, especially at, I think middle school age, like organize their mini society. But again, like I think in my class, it's cool to see. Like we'll have guys who play football talk to guys who run track, or guys that play soccer talk to guys who play the violin, or play squash. So it's cool to see like. There is that dynamic of like who maybe has more like cachet or who's cooler or whatever, but in the class it kind of gets erased.
Yeah, that's
my
good.
Class. I think it does. So
good. Well, Will, let's get to the book rec that you brought in today. What do you have for us?
So this is something I'm still reading. I ordered it on Saturday, got here on Sunday. This is called "Talking to My Daughter About the Economy and How Capitalism Works and How It Fails." I can't pronounce this guy's name. I'm gonna butcher it. He's Greek, but his name's Yanis Varoufakis, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's basically this guy writing sort of like a letter to his daughter about he's a former Greek finance minister, and he's talking to his daughter about like how the economy works and like where like he talks about the origins of the for-profit motive, which is something I never thought about. I kind of assumed like like everything's always been for profit, like that's how life goes. But he talks about how like it emerged out of serfdom and the ending of it. And how like the serfs that are renting land had to do everything for profit so they can survive the next year. It's really interesting. He talks about how the agricultural revolution led to European basically like dominance over the world. So it's really interesting stuff. And I think if you're a person who's curious about like does the world have to organize resources in the way that we do? Why do countries in Africa suffer the way they do versus like I don't know, why does Switzerland not suffer the way that Africa does? So like if you're ever been curious about that, this book has been awesome and transformative for me. It's answered some questions that like I've always thought about but never had the guts to even say out loud, and I think it's like really helped me think about the world differently. So that's my book rec. He does a really good job of taking complicated ideas and putting it in plain English, because again he's talking to his daughter, so it's really neat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think again, like watching the younger kids and how they act selfishly and for their own profit and trying to get ahead of other people. I think that competitive nature. I think that's sort of what capitalism is about. Is supply and demand, and what can you do for me, and what do I have that you don't have, and how can we trade? How can we exchange goods and ideas and it's interesting. I think the letter format too is maybe compelling, because I don't know, when I teach writing, sometimes I have students just write a letter to somebody, and some of the best writing comes out of the intimate
personal,
nature of that letter, to your daughter, to whoever. So
and he definitely gets into that, and I think that dynamic definitely helps to spread the like he makes the wonky stuff less wonky, but he even talks about like how like interest, how it used to be like a sin in many religions, like in Islam it's a sin. I believe in Catholicism it used to be a sin, and then like he talks about how like that dynamic and it like changes the way that loans work. Like it's so fascinating to me, and it's again stuff maybe other people knew but I had no idea about. But yeah, no, it definitely again like if you're a person who's curious about the world, like I read a lot of books about the Cold War. Like I don't know, like I'm just a curious person about the world. And I wasn't a reader in high school. That's one thing I want to stress to people. I went to Arundel High School, went to a large public school in Maryland. I did not want to read. You had to force me to read. But as an adult, I've been super curious about the world, and now I realize I have to. If I want to learn more, I have to read.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to read when teachers are just giving you books and saying you've got to read to page 50 by
like books
tomorrow.
Books like Beowulf. I'm sorry, like I know I teach language arts, but guys, like that book stinks. Like we should stop teaching stuff like that. Make reading relevant to the kids, man. Like that stuff. Like at least to the 14-year-old working class black kid that I was, like I picked up that book. I was like, this is dumb, dude. Like, we gotta find something else. Could we read something about the NFL?
Yeah.
Like like let's read something cooler than this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think sometimes you've just got to appeal to the age and the student and get a book in their hand no matter what it takes, you know?
And I think there's room for like, hey, this is a classic. Like read Great Gatsby. There's room for that.
Yeah.
But you have to, again, be explicit about how it's relevant to the kids and be like, hey, this is a classic. Like this is why we have to read it because like we just value this as a society. I think where teachers, I think, fall short sometimes is like, you're just not making it explicit enough as to why it matters to the kid. Mm-hmm. And like that's something we should always do. Because even like 7th graders, like, well, why do we read this? Why do we do this? Like, well, A, because I said so. B, because like I think this will help you as a person.
Yeah.
And your humanity ultimately.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where teachers got to make reading relevant to the kid, man.
Yeah, especially with the phones and the iPads and the addiction and all that stuff.
Yeah. If I could collect, I probably shouldn't say this on podcast, but if I could collect every middle school iPad and toss it into a lake.
Do they all have iPads?
They do, yeah. And like they're so like 70 to 80% of kids can handle it. Like they can. You tell them to close the iPad, they'll close it. But there is a contingency of kid that just cannot help themselves. And I think in the middle school, at least I know the LA department, I can't speak for other departments, like we're really intentional about when and how we use the iPad. And I think as a teacher, if you can avoid it, avoid it. In the middle school. I don't know how it works in upper school. I don't know if kids are gaming during class, whatever. But like, I think as a rule of thumb, like if you can avoid the iPad, avoid it. They cannot handle it.
Yeah. But that's a big thing with middle school kids is that it's helpful for parents sometimes to say, oh, we've got a long car ride or your parents are busy tonight. Like, here's the iPad and it'll entertain kids for 3 hours, you know? Totally. So I see how it is necessary and why it's tempting is like, here, distract yourself for a little bit.
I'm not a parent, but I can get it. Like, you're tired. Like, I get home, I'm tired. I wouldn't have to deal with like a 5, 6, 7-year-old or whatever. It's like, all right, take this iPad, be quiet, and just let me chill.
Yeah, it's great.
But again, I think it's like, if we zoom out for society, is it good? Like, okay, this is what I'll tell my students. Like, I asked them, like, why do you guys need phones? They go, well, what if an emergency happens, like, and I need to call my mom? Well, A, she can't stop the emergency. She can't. If the emergency happens, it happened. So, like, that stinks. B, what does it say about humanity that you can't rely on someone close to you to help you? That, like, oh, I can't expect the other humans around me to feel bad for me and help me in my emergency. That says that we are not in a good place. So I prefer to live in a world where, like, you know what, I'm going to put my phone down. I'm gonna assume and hope that if I'm in some trouble, my tire goes out, I get in an accident, whatever, that there will be people around me. Hopefully humanity has not gone to poop to this point that they will help me in that moment. Even like, and the analogy I make is like, oh, call me when your flight lands. It's like, why? If the plane goes down, you'll know about it. You'll hear about it in the news. And if it goes down, you're not going to be there to stop it. So like, I will just assume that things will go well and you'll hear from me eventually. We don't need the instant gratification, man. We don't need it.
Yeah, you're speaking like a true English teacher here.
Yeah. And also, like, kids, like, again, like, pick up a book. Put down your phone, pick up a book. Like, you'll learn more about the world. Get off of TikTok, too.
Yeah.
Like, it's corrupting your brain, dude. Like, that's my message to any high schooler that might listen to this or middle schooler. Get off TikTok. Get off the Instagram Reels. Get off of IG. Get off Snapchat. You don't need to take a picture of everything you do. It's not good, man.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah. We were talking
I feel like I sound like a hippie, but like I'm saying this as a person who like is not a hippie.
Well, I think time and place. Like I think school. You know, it's just depressing sometimes walking around and everyone's on their phone. Yeah,
totally. And I think like, again, I compare it to driving a car. Like as an adult, I trust myself to moderate my like social media usage. I think kids, like most of them can't drive cars, cannot moderate by themselves their social media.
It's a drug.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally like gambling. Like it's the exact same thing. So I think, again, for any kids that might listen to this, like, don't trust yourself to moderate your social media usage. Just assume it's bad for you and don't do it. Wait until you turn 21 or whatever. Live your life. Go outside and
touch grass.
Yeah, touch grass.
Well, Will, I've got to run to first period here, but it was a pleasure having you in today. Best of luck on the presentation this weekend.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have a good time. It's crazy. You're done the program almost. So
yeah. Thank God. I just want to give it like a mini shout out to Arundel High School. Go Wildcats! In my estimation, it's the best school in the country. Or go Arundel.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.